All right. I am so excited to welcome you all here this morning. Good morning. My name is Michele Siekerka. I'm the president and CEO of the New Jersey Business and Industry Associated, and we are so excited to invite you here this morning to join us for our inaugural Diversity and Inclusion Summit, Stronger Together. Now more than ever, this theme is so relevant and timely. But how do we make it happen and then maximize it, especially during times like those we're experiencing now? COVID, social equity, economic challenges, personal strife, you name it, we're experiencing it. And the role of D&I through all of this, so significantly important. Few housekeeping rules before we begin today. For the maximum benefit of the discussion, I encourage you, change your screen view from gallery to speaker. And if you're not sure how, the team will put some directions in the chat. During our fireside chat, please ask questions throughout. I will do my best to entertain them, and please feel free to join in the discussion at any time through the chat, because we know that's how great momentum and energy is built through these events. Before we continue the program, I want to thank all those organizations without which this event could not happen. And this event is being produced in partnership with the following: New Jersey Manufacturers Insurance Group, Bank of America, Investors Bank, Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield, RWJ Barnabas, Atlantic Health, Delta Dental, New Jersey's Clean Energy Program, McCarter & English, ExxonMobil, New Jersey Resources, Creative Blueprints for Leaders, Capital Health, and Wedgwood Pharmacy. I want to extend my thanks to all of these organizations for their support today. This year, it is also our pleasure during the program to honor 4 outstanding New Jersey businesses that are going above and beyond when it comes to diversity and inclusion. Please take the time to watch our 2021 Diversity and Inclusion Winner Awards, where you can find on the tape, and that'll be set in during the schedule as well. But our award winners this year are American Water, ExxonMobil, McCarter & English, and Panasonic. It is incredible what leaders these organizations are in D&I and the best practices you can pick up just by hearing their speeches as they accept their awards. So please take time to see that. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank our fearless leaders, the D&I Council chairs, Rena Desai of Panasonic North America, Deborah Kestenbaum of Wedgwood Pharmacy, Siekerka Hopkins of the New Jersey Small Business Development Center at Rutgers Business School, and Roderick Bowman, American Red Cross. So now let's get on with our program. And it is truly my pleasure to present our fireside chat. This interactive discussion is meant to provide an opportunity for all of you to ask questions in addition to the ones I'll be presenting to our guest. As I said before, please place your questions in the chat and we'll do our best to get to them as the program moves along. Allow me now to introduce Tanuja Dehne. Tanuja is the president and CEO of the Geraldine R Foundation. Previously, she was the chief of staff at NJBIA, and she serves on numerous corporate boards as well. Tanuja is recognized as a national speaker on issues affecting ESG, environmental, social, and governance issues. I had the great joy of serving with her on the board of Young Audiences of New Jersey, where she was board chair. Tanuja, it is my pleasure to welcome you here today. And let's give our audience a chance to get to know you a little better. Please take a few moments to introduce yourself to all of us.
Well, Michele, thank you so much for having me. This is just it's great to be here and kick off this D&I Summit. I'm the president and CEO of the Geraldine R Foundation. We are a New Jersey place-based philanthropic organization. We have been supporting the arts, education, environment, informed communities, which is news and local voices, as well as the largest poetry festival in North America and a technical assistance program. Over the last 45 years, the foundation has granted over $500 million in grants across the state. We've also really been very, very serious and intentional about our commitment to becoming an anti-racist organization and centering our work on racial equity and justice. And that is our transformation and our vision as we think about the future. I'm also a corporate board member. As Michele said, I serve on a number of public company boards, and I, kind of straddled both worlds, the not-for-profit world and the corporate world. But the thread through both is governance, and really what's come to light this year is kind of the S in ESG, people. and people rising finally to the surface of a priority item on corporate and not-for-profit agendas. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Michele.
And we're going to touch all those areas this morning, Tanuja. In our prep call, we could have gone on for hours, right? I mean, we were just so engaged. And so I've been looking forward to this. And I know the audience is really going to enjoy this interactive discussion, but we're going to talk about, your role as a leader of a philanthropic organization and what that means. And then we're also going to talk about why D&I is so important in the boardroom. And again, you can offer varying perspectives from that as well. But look, let's start from a year like no other, not just COVID, all the clear disparities we've seen regarding the impact from COVID directly, be it by population directly affected by health impact, but also economically. In both of these examples, the data has shown time and time again that people of color have been disparately impacted, whether it be by underlying conditions based upon certain genes and certain, cultural folks in their ethnicity, or be it the disparities in the workforce where we see the working woman, especially the working women of color, being the most disparately impacted through this time. How has this played out for nonprofits and the role of philanthropy? Give us an idea of some of the biggest challenges over the past year and how we've overcome those, or trying to overcome those.
So I still can't believe that we've now passed the 1-year anniversary where we're all here. Welcome to my home, and we're kind of, this pandemic isn't over, and as we think about it. 12 months going into 13 months, this pandemic wall is something that we're all hitting in our own way. And I bring that up because there's some interesting bright spots to these crises that we have faced as a society. And one of the bright spots I would say is, first of all, resiliency of individuals, resiliency of community, resiliency of organizations. And something else I would just share is collaboration. So a year ago, when all of this was happening and we were all in a bit of a panic mode, whether, just I'm just trying to figure out what's going to happen in our own families, but what's happening in the community, the funders in the state, came together and I think really realized, the Dodge Foundation, I will say, realized that there were fundamental basic human needs not being met. Food, shelter, healthcare. And that is not, as I described earlier, that is not something we typically fund, but realized that we had to. And the best way that we could provide the support and use our power and influence and our voice was to co-fund and collaborate. And we've collaborated by providing grants to a number of pooled funds across the state that were geographically diverse in many ways, and focused in on what was needed in the community, what was relevant for the community. We were also invested quite a bit in the New Jersey Pandemic Relief Fund, where funders, philanthropists, individuals, family foundations came together and also did quite a bit of fundraising, again, to distribute and deploy funding to not-for-profits across the state. But the not-for-profit sector has just proven to be absolutely resilient. You think about the folks who are leading and in not-for-profit organizations, they are entrepreneurs and innovators. And they shifted and figured out how to provide the services in different ways, whether it was, through technology, whether it was through, risking their own lives to deliver food, but they figured it out. And so as a funder, what we realized too is that these organizations, they know what they're doing. And so we switched at the Dodge Foundation almost all of our funding to general operating support, which was basically, you do you. We trust you. We understand what's needed in the field, and here is the support as best as we can provide it for you to do you and make sure that the services are being provided. But
I don't want to interrupt you, but I want to emphasize something here. This is significantly important, okay? Because, nonprofits, their biggest challenge most of the time is funders want to fund program. And they say, show me where my money's in program and don't show me administrative expense. And funders tend to forget who runs the programs. The people do. And the fact that, you know, your organization has the wherewithal to recognize in this crisis time, to trust the organization on how that money needs to be spent and fund the ability to put the program on the street is significant. And I have to highlight that because I just want to make sure people realize how significant that is.
And many, many funders across the state did this, shifted to this general operating support. What I'll say for the Dodge Foundation is that we're taking those lessons into our future grant making. It's really leaning into what is known as trust-based philanthropy principles. Trust the organizations, simplify things, really think about minimizing the guidelines and the application process. Our largest program area last year, largest grant making, was in crisis response and what we are also calling election integrity grants. And we deployed funds, within a matter of days, because it was a matter of calling up folks, expanding the network. Those collaborations I was talking about would say, we're funding this XYZ organization. We call them up, we write the reports, we deploy the funds. And so that worked for us for the largest program area last year. And we're absolutely taking that into how we're leaning into our work and our commitment to anti-racism going forward.
Oh, it's fantastic. Over this last year, though, we all have our aha moments, right? So let's start with really where was that moment? Where was that one great moment where you said, I'm here and, what do I do?
I would say it was March of last year. I was in the job leading the Dodge Foundation for just a couple of months. I started in September of 2019. And, I was hired to effectuate and execute on the strategic direction of the Dodge Foundation and centering our work on equity, this journey that we've been on. And then really wanting personally to lean into being a servant leader and extremely collaborative and honestly, I was being onboarded in the midst of all of this. And what happened last March was what happened to everybody else. And what was needed was command and control, which was something I was, deeply uncomfortable with. But what I've also learned is that, and appreciated, is that there's so many different types of leadership styles that need to be deployed on any given day. And when we're in the middle of a crisis, the health and safety and the well-being of my people were paramount. Because if they're not healthy, they're not safe, and they're not cared for, then how can we be of service to our community?
Oh, couldn't agree more. It all starts on the inside. So, this is meant to be a best practice resource, et cetera, but also inspirational. And so, look, we've all hit the wall over the last year, present company included. I can go back a year ago and think of the times that I almost just wanted to throw the blanket over my head and say, can't do this for another day. And then we all find our inner strength and our inspiration. For our leaders out there who are, and again, a year like no other, COVID alone would have been astronomical, but we again layer on all these other issues on top of it, right? Where can a leader find the inspiration and the inner strength to pull the blanket off of their head and say, I'm hitting the floor running today, let's go?
Well, personally, I really go back to yoga and meditation. Those are, I was for a short period of time a yoga teacher, and I practice meditation. I am by no means imperfect, or I am imperfect, I should say. But I think, those tools really helped me through this year to tap into compassion and gratitude in ways that I didn't expect. And I'm so grateful that, just all these different experiences I've had over my life really positioned and poised me to be ready for this. So it's really just pulling a number of different arrows out of the quiver to try, because self-care has become, for our organization, just absolutely critical. as I had mentioned before, but primarily as we begin 2021 because of this COVID wall. So we're finding ways to provide space for our folks to grieve. There's so many things to grieve about. And so we have to acknowledge that, but also joy, finding those spaces for joy and acknowledging them.
Now, you talked about focus on racism and really shifting the focus for the foundation. Can you elaborate for us what took you there, how you got there, and why it was important to get there? And I'm sure you're still on a journey, so feel free to talk about the fact that the destination hasn't been met yet.
Yes, I think the work is in the journey, and we are still on it. But the Dodge Foundation took a concerted effort, like almost 5 years ago, to begin this journey of equity and centering our work on equity. But as you can imagine, that takes a lot of internal reflection and just understanding what does that mean for us and our work. And what does that mean for us as we operate and work together as an organization? I would say that this year, past year, 2020, was really a catalyst. A catalyst in that after the calls for racial justice that have been going on for decades came to the fore last summer, after the murder of George Floyd, lots of organizations were making statements. And I'm glad for that. But we were ready to actually put action to words. And we leapt forward as an organization to say, this is what we're going to do. And we are naming race and racial equity as a priority, as we center our work at the foundation on that, and really bringing all of our resources to bear as a funding organization. There's the grants, but we also are a financial institution. We have an endowment. And how can we bring all of our resources to bear to address structural impediments and historical barriers to equity in the state? Now, with all humility, we don't know all the answers, and we're not the experts. And so we're leaning heavily on our community leaders. And bringing to the table what we can bring, which is our power, our influence, our voice, and our funding dollars, but to support and then step out of the way. And that's really hard for philanthropy. That's a different kind of model, but that's a model we're leaning into because we're not the center. We can't be the center. The community needs to be the center. And these are the things that we're trying and practicing and leaning into. Oh, you're on mute, Michele.
So, I made a comment before we started that a cat might be meowing in the background, so I wanted to spare everyone that. So, you made the comment about with humility, you're in but not quite there, right? Again, journey, not destination. With our D&I Council, we emphasize this all the time. And here's the importance of these discussions. Wherever you are on the spectrum, accept where you are and aspire for the next step, right? We want to create safe zones. And this is what you're doing. Create safe zones to have open discussion about where you are on the spectrum and help to say where are the best practices to take us to the next level. Don't be embarrassed about where you are on the spectrum because, people are awakening at different points. And the most important thing is lean in and get into the game, right, Tanuja?
Oh, Michele, it's absolutely right. And we've learned this over the last 5 years on our equity journey. We would take 1 step forward and 3 steps backwards because we would know enough sometimes to be dangerous and in some cases harmful. And so what we've really learned is that it's so important to call in with compassion and love and meet people where they are, as opposed to calling out and shaming folks. Now, human nature, we know what happens when we're shamed. We resort back to our worst selves. And when we are on these difficult journeys, we cannot allow that to happen. So we just need to figure out tools and mechanisms that we can have courageous conversations across difference. I'm still trying to figure this out. I'm not great at it, but I at least will say, okay, something's going on here in the middle of a Zoom meeting, for example. Let's stop for a moment and kind of figure out, is this, why is this thing happening? Or in a different context, if somebody said something that was problematic, what I'll usually do is call the person in separately, one-on-one, and just let's have a conversation about that. And let's acknowledge, and let's figure out tools that we can come back and acknowledge that something was said or something was done, but let's do it with some grace and compassion for each other, because we're all trying to figure this out. What I say oftentimes is that I've had a really amazing 30-year career where I've stood on the shoulders of so many, but the reality is that as a woman of color, I got to where I am by assimilating and giving in and doing what everyone else was around me was doing. And I am acknowledging it, and I'm saying it, and I'm saying it out loud, that I have a lot of unlearning to do, 30 years of unlearning. We all do. And so if we can just have a little grace for each other, I think together we'll get there in a much more constructive way.
Well, the theme, stronger together, Tanuja. And, I'll share. So I've lived this from two different perspectives, and it's important as leaders that we share this, because there have been points in time that I have said, as a white woman, what right do I have speaking out on the issues for someone of color? So I struggled with that and realized, oh no, I have a place and need to speak out, because I understand the importance of my voice in that. But when you talk about assimilate as being a woman first, and I think through my entire career as a young lawyer litigator who sat in the courtroom, very early in the 1990s as the only female blue suit getting ready to stand up in front of a judge, which seems odd in the 90s, but was, right? To belonging to social clubs that were all men and two women, to sitting on boards and in board rooms, being the only woman around the table. That term of assimilation is so true. And when I talk about leadership skills, at times I say, don't be afraid to say, I'm one of the guys, right? But don't forget who you are as one of the women. And I think that goes across the entirety. And what you just said about unlearning how we assimilated and allowing ourselves to come back to be who we are in our organic, authentic self is self-learning and self-awareness, right? It doesn't come easy, Tanuja, does it?
It doesn't, because we realize that, there's a lot of things that we've done over the years that, if I would give my advice to my younger self, I'd say you might want to do things differently. But here we are. And I know that I'm a role model and a leader, and I have power and influence and voice. And so I make it a point to really talk about this. This assimilation point is so important, because whether it's the corporate setting or the not-for-profit setting, when we're talking about recruiting talent and recruiting new voices and perspectives, we often recruit for diversity, and we have to think about why we're recruiting and what does diversity mean. But then let's take that a step forward. Then we onboard for assimilation. And so we're not onboarding for inclusivity, we're onboarding. So, okay, here you are, now fall into line. And so, by the way, that's a leader, an inspiration to me. That's Beth Zemsky who says that. Beth Zemsky is somebody who helped us at the Dodge Foundation on our intercultural competency. And she'll say that we recruit for diversity, but onboard for assimilation. And so I think when we have these conversations about D&I, we have to have the through line and continue the conversation, because you can recruit and recruit and recruit and check the boxes all you want. But if you can't keep people, and if you're not creating an environment where people feel that they can share their voices and that they are valued, they will leave. And as leaders, I think what's really important to note is I have children. Lots of people do. And generations before coming after us, Gen Z, millennials, just as a business model, business case, the generations coming after us will not tolerate this. So as I think about my corporate boards and being a business leader, if we don't pay attention to what's coming and what matters to the millennial generation, Gen Z, and I don't even know what the generation after is, but I think I have kids in that group. then those businesses or organizations are going to fall behind. I didn't say that very articulately, but
you totally did. We totally get it. No, and Tanuja, when I speak all the time, and I talk to our businesses here in the state of New Jersey, and I kind of get in front of them and I talk about leaning in on these issues, and I say, so here's the reality: you want to hire the best and the brightest and the most competitive, your workforce. That's who you want, right? Guess what? Here's what they want. And until you start driving a mission-driven, cultures-driven organization, you might be sitting on the sidelines of attracting the best and the brightest. So I want to go there, Tanuja, because you talked about, and I love this, recruit for diversity and onboard with assimilation, and it's true. But how do you merge these concepts relative then to corporate values? Because you want to assimilate to corporate values, right? And yet you want to make sure that those values are evolving to what the needs of your organization are. So talk a little bit about the importance of culture, and then tone at the top when it comes to culture and living our values every day.
You said something really important about values. So, mission, vision, values, those are kind of, Michele, we've worked on these together.
Yes. The hedgehog. Wait, where's my, here we go.
Yes.
Our sweet spot, here's our hedgehog.
And so they're really important, but I think we have to recognize that in an evolving world, that mission, vision, and values need to be flexible and organic, and they do change. And that's okay. Just recognizing that, I think, is important, because if we keep relying on words that made sense even a year ago, they may not make sense going forward. But as we think about culture, it absolutely starts at the top. And Michele, I know you've heard me talk about this before, but I really am a firm believer on this tool called the Culture Retreat. It's something that I've used in my corporate and my not-for-profit boards and in leadership teams. And it's really, really simple. It's basically, just allocating a couple hours of some time where you can have an open and generative conversation. It could be facilitated or not. But there's really 4 things that we talk about. What is our purpose? Like, if it's a team, what is the team's purpose? It's important that everyone have a voice to share what they think that team's purpose is. Because sometimes we're not talking the same thing. And I think it really is important for corporate boards, for example. Let's just say what our purpose is here. Some will say for shareholder value, others will say something completely different. So just name it. The second piece is, how are we going to communicate with each other? Again, there's lots of assumptions about communication. And this is where it's really important to have these conversations in an open, generative way, because this is where you can really talk about, what does inclusive conversation and communication mean? And this is what I'm bringing to the table. The third part is, how will decisions be made? Okay, so this is whatever the team is, if it's a hierarchical team, whether it's a board, it doesn't matter. But decisions are made, and people need to know, am I providing input and you're making the decision? Are decisions going to be made on the golf course, and when you come back here, it's a fait accompli? Like, let's just say it out loud. And the fourth component is, how are we going to hold ourselves accountable? And again, doing this on a clear day when there isn't an issue is really important. Your rule of engagement could be, if you step in it, I'm going to call you in with love and compassion. Our performance evaluations are going to have some teeth. And so if performance evaluations at the board level come back and they aren't working, then we're going to have succession events. So again, these are really simple, but wow, they really work. And so I just say this, and let me just explain also why I came up with this concept of the Culture Retreat. I was being recruited to my 3rd corporate board. And before I joined that board, I talked to the CEO and said, I need to understand, I've been on a couple of other corporate boards, and I just need to understand, why are you recruiting me? And he said the right thing. It's because you're a compensation committee expert, and we need you as the chair of this committee, which I was really happy to hear. But I said, okay, well, I do bring that to the table. I said, but I just want to make sure that, that we are being open and inclusive. And I said to him, I'm not just coming onto this board as a token, and I'm not coming onto this board just to keep my mouth shut and fall into line. I can't do that. I won't do that. And he could have said, I don't want you on the board. And by the way, I've had a few people who just said, we don't want this person on our board. But I just had to be true to myself. And it was a great board. That was a great board I was on. We did the culture retreats, and we were so great that somebody decided to buy us.
So, that's, bring on your authentic self, and don't be afraid to do it. You're in that room for a reason. Make your presence known respectfully, and be heard. Now, not always easy, but there are ways to do that. And a lot of the work we do at BIA in our clinics and weekly and monthly, in our summit, et cetera, with our women's business leadership group, we do that. We focus on the house, which is so critically important in our own personal self-development and skill building, right? So, we've talked about diversity in terms of, gender, ethnicity, otherwise. Generational. We have a question in the chat box. We have organization, and this is not, I love, because, we are in a unique situation with 5 generations, with very different views on diversity and inclusion. I know many 4 generations out there. 5, there might not be as many, but we know more and more older folks are staying in the workforce, while the 18 to 34-year-olds are coming in. And so how can organizations best engage the entire population from a generational perspective on how we address specifically diversity and inclusion? Thoughts on that?
That's a tricky one. I think I try to start at the top on some of these topics when we're trying to bring people together. And I think it starts with conversations around kind of the shared understanding or shared purpose, what is the shared purpose of the organization, and how does that resonate across the generations? I also think, at the end of the day, sometimes I think folks, and it's because I'm a parent, so I can't help this, but sometimes what I had found, because I did work at a Fortune 200 company, which had a very diverse population, is that, sometimes we don't give credit to the older generations and their understanding and their compassion and of the younger generations. And one of the reasons is because we're not maybe realizing that they have children of that age, and they actually understand maybe better than us. But one thing that I think about structurally that we need to address, though, and I understand there's a number of HR professionals in the audience, is incentives really do matter. And I think that if we try to plug and play incentives that resonate for a generation that's maybe 5 to 10 years out from retirement, are not going to be the same incentives that are going to be attractive for your newer workforce. And that's always been the case in some respects. There's always been kind of the challenge of how do you get those in their 20s and early 30s to care about retirement. But now it's gotten even more complicated because there's values differences. Home ownership, car ownership, free time, being able to, valuing balance. And then of course, this pandemic has really shown and surfaced issues of, single parenthood and the need for childcare. There's just value differences now across the generations. And I think that as HR professionals, we really need to create internal structures that are desirable for the different populations. And I know sometimes that's easier said than done, but when I sit on a corporate board, we spend a lot of our time focusing on the C-suite and the executives. And one of the things I've seen change, particularly this past year, is focusing in all the way to our frontline workers and trying to understand what is incentivizing and how can we create a container of care for all of our employees, if that makes sense. That's an observation that I saw, was that just the incentives are or disconnected.
No, totally. You know, we talk about that a lot, even when it comes to, building wealth in generations and how and trust for institution, right? Because every generation is informed in a different way. And we talk about, traditional 401ks, for example, and how the next generation may not trust institution because they saw stock market crashes and things like that. So it is true. You mentioned about the commonality. I always call it the rule of five, and this is in everything, because this is in our advocacy and this is in building compromise. The rule of five is we can have disparate around the table. The harsh reality and the great reality is easily we've got two things in common all the time. All the time, we got two things in common. Let's focus on maximizing those first two things that we all have and set the tone from there, right? At the same time, we probably got two things that we are so divergent on that I'm all the way on the left side and you're all the way on the right side, however you want to define left and right for that purpose, right? That we shouldn't be bringing that up right now. We need to build trust before we go there. Let's put those in the parking lot for the moment. And then that fifth one is probably in the gray area where if we just did a little bit of work, we can come to some easy compromises, probably some low hanging fruit, right? I don't know why as a society, we always start with the things that separate us the most without starting things that bring us together first, build trust in that moment, and then go and take on those harder issues, right? It's just the way our society operates. We seem to be a little bit backward, and we can find a lot of commonality, Tanuja, right?
Michele, that's a great point. At the Dodge Foundation, one of the things that we're really kind of honing in on is trust amongst ourselves. We've been an organization that's been in so much change over the last several years, and building trust amongst our board and our staff. And what we've started to do is what we're calling pairs and triad conversations. We just mix it up, and we call them like low stakes, low key conversations. On your own time, schedule 30 or 45 minutes. We have a couple of prompts, but the goal is not answering the prompt. The goal is just getting to know each other on a human level. The goal is honestly, if your 35 minutes, 30 minutes are spent chit-chatting and getting to know each other as human beings, mission accomplished. And so I just think some of those tools and investments of time with each other Michele, your rule of five is brilliant, because once you can get through
get the trademark out.
No, but I mean, like once you kind of get through, like, oh, this is a person, a human being, where then we can tackle the harder conversations, the trickier ones, with some humanity for each other. Yeah, oh, I'm going to take your rule of five, Michele, but don't worry, I will attribute it to you.
I've already taken many notes on many things you've said, so I love the culture retreat, by the way. So now, Tanuja, clearly, you've got it. You're a leader who leads. You got the tone at the top. You're building the culture, etc. Let's talk about the other aspects of your organization and who needs to come along. We talked about how you're bringing your workforce along. Awesome. Let's go to the boardroom. Okay. You talked about the focus on racism, diversity, etc. How are you bringing your board along, or your board is already there, and how are they leaning in, and what type of dialogue? What do we need to know in the boardroom in order to take it from the C-suite into the boardroom for effective governance?
So I could take this from a couple of different perspectives. The first one is at the Dodge Foundation. I'm really grateful. The Dodge board is there, and they're extremely supportive and trust us to do what we need to do. However, we took a leap forward. And so our board has made such a big commitment in leaning into the learning, these pairs and triads, these additional time spent working on, Dodge work. But one thing I would just mention is that as part of our technical assistance program this year, we offered a 5-month-long program to our grantees called an Anti-Racism, Anti-Oppression Learning to Applied Practice. And 400 individuals, and I think it's close to 120 New Jersey organizations have been part of this 5-month-long learning journey. And it's the learning to apply. That's a really important aspect of it. But the Dodge Foundation board and staff is participating in it. And so it's a big time commitment. And I think that's what's really important is once an organization makes that commitment, I think it's important that the board is making a commitment as well, but also understanding what the board's role is. Board's role is on oversight. This is corporate and not for profit. And so embracing a learning agenda, but also having a trust of your staff and your management team to implement and execute on that. When I think about corporate boards, and I speak about this a lot to corporate directors and board diversity, similar topics, the culture retreat and in making sure you're recruiting for inclusion. But I also, one of the things that I also share with the corporate boards is making sure you have the right advisors. It's so important. You've got lawyers and auditors and comp consultants who are advising boards and making sure that they've got, first of all, those three big ones are leading edge and not roadblocks to diversity, because sometimes they can be. But then making sure that if you don't have the right advisors, that you're finding the right advisors. And then as it relates to your management team, making sure that your CHROs and your chief sustainability officers, or those who are responsible for D&I, which frankly should be the CEO. The CEO needs to be responsible for this, that those individuals are reporting to the CEO or reporting to the C-suite, and that they have a seat at the boardroom table, that you get to hear from these individuals about what's going on in diversity in the organization. And then from a nominating and corporate governance standpoint, the corporate boards are realizing finally, and you're seeing some numbers shifting towards more gender and racial diversity on corporate boards. But my opinion on that is that it's a bit glacially slow. And so we need to pick up the pace and stop asking the same 20 people to join your boards.
In terms of picking up the pace, right? Again, when I'm out speaking and I tell my businesses lean in, I say the same thing when it comes to leaning in and having a very diverse pool within which to go swimming, so that you're not asking the same 20 people all the time, right? And companies are getting there, some glacially slow, right? Others just jumping ahead, okay? The question of mandating behavior, and there's a question on this, and I want to expound on this question because I will start from the premise that BIA always begins with, we don't like mandates, right? Mandates forces behavior, it forces checking a box, it also forces costs for business that oftentimes have unintended consequences. This is why we say lean in. Let's say great businesses make great communities. When you work to values, you have natural outcomes. If you work for just outcomes, the values fall out, right? This all works. I mean, this all value-driven, leaning in, right, has ROI to it. So we don't like mandates, but what are your thoughts on either mandating seats on boards like California did for women, and or the question in the chat is, what about mandating unconscious bias training? I mean, shouldn't it be happening anyway, but what about mandates, Tanuja?
I'm a trained securities lawyer. And so for the first 20 years of my life, it was all about disclosure. And what I was trained to do, talk about unlearning, was trained to provide the least amount of information possible. And so for me, my gut and my heart says that mandates and making people do something that they don't want to do could be more harmful, somewhat dilutive, and it becomes a check the box exercise. So I'd rather flip the narrative and say that these are material issues that are going to impact the long-term value of your organization. If you're not paying attention to your workforce, if you're not understanding that, in one of my boards, it was one of my companies, it was an aging workforce. It was an aging workforce, and we didn't have the talent pipeline to move into that workforce because it's an inherently dangerous job, and people could get paid just as much doing something that was traditionally much more safe to do. Not recognizing that workforce planning issue as a material risk is going to be problematic for an organization. And as you think about the training and mandating it, I think, and mandating California, see, those are the things that I do have opinions on. My point of view on these are like, well, we've been so slow. Maybe we need to do something like that. I know New Jersey had that on the ballot, and not the ballot, but in legislation. But California has it. But if that's a way to make it work, then so be it. But I'm just not a huge fan of it because I also, I guess, got a problem with people thinking I'm on the board because I'm a woman of color and not somebody who adds value. So there's a lot of stuff we have to work through. But I'd flip the narrative in the boardroom. I'd ask them, so do you see a value in us taking, as a board, unconscious bias training management team? How about we do this together? Or if you have done it, what have you learned from it? And how is this impacting your organization? But this also brings into it, Michele, do you have the right people in the boardroom if they're questioning taking unconscious bias training?
You got it. You got it.
If they're questioning whether there should be diversity on the board. And so that's where you need some courage in that boardroom. And sometimes on a clear day, having the conversation of, do we have the right people in this boardroom that's going to create value over the long term? I noticed I didn't use the word diversity once in that. Do we have the right people in this boardroom to create value over the long term?
But I want to take that term a step further, because this is what we hear also, right, in the boardroom. You said the right people. Oftentimes we can use the term the right people to hinder or get in the way of diversity. I just want the best person. And then the issue is, what does the board table look like today? Where are they used to fishing? Okay. In terms of who they know, who they think are the right people because of the skill set, because they don't have visibility to the other people in the diverse communities who have the skill sets that they're looking for. So creating the visibility into our diverse populations where there are multiples of thousands of people who have the skills, right? But being bold enough to create the relationships to get you fishing in that pool. Again, this is, I offer it up as a question or a comment. How do we help people to get there? Because that idea of the right person sometimes can actually hinder the diverse conversation.
Oh, Michele, you are absolutely correct, because we will create, if we want to create roadblocks, we'll create roadblocks and we'll call it all sorts of names. So I'm a nom-gov chair on corporate boards, and over the last 10 years serving on these boards, I've kind of moved from let's expand our networks by, going to our networks and asking the networks and kind of keep expanding that way in an organic way. And then move to let's tap into affinity groups and see, the forums of executive women, which I am a member of. But I kind of come to this realization that, and I wasn't a fan of this before, but I'm pushing this these days, is that I do think that a search firm can be very helpful in having a facilitated conversation about prioritizing diversity before you even talk about kind of the other attributes of recruitment onto your board. And I know that could be cost prohibitive. That's one of the reasons why I didn't get there early, because a lot of my boards are like, I'm not paying for that. But I think it's an important investment to think about how you can have a conversation where an informed third party, this is why I said advisors are important, can challenge, but then also bring in your board to have the conversation about, like, what are the skills and attributes needed now? What do we have around this boardroom? Do we need another CEO? Do we need another CFO? Do we need another person with experience on public company boards? By the way, those are 3 structural impediments. Or what do we need in the future? Are we a retail organization that is trying to sell our products and services to a different generation? Who are the consumers of the future? So my point of view has shifted over time. And I do think, because I've seen this work really well, is if you can hire the right or the good search firm that's culturally competent to have these conversations, it can be very helpful in advancing this dialogue. Easier said than done. I will be the first to admit it.
But you know what? You can start today. Again, please don't be embarrassed that I'm not there. Wherever you are on the spectrum is an opportunity to continue a journey. And I will tell you at BIA, the whole idea of having a roadmap. So we, for our board, we created a heat map. We represent New Jersey business. If my board does not reflect what New Jersey business looks like, I have a big problem in advocating for business, right? And so we created this heat map of, what does business in the state of New Jersey look like? How does my board match up to that today? Okay. And where do I have gaps? Okay, now with intent and purpose, I'm going to start creating the pool, because look, I can't bring them all on tomorrow, right? But I'm going to create opportunities along the spectrum to ensure that I continue to build out so that we can properly reflect. This is no different for corporate board, nonprofit board, right? And the same in your organization, like your organization. Shouldn't your organization reflect who you're serving, Tanuja?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there was something that you said too. I was thinking about all these different code words we use, code for like the right people. The other one is cultural fit. I think, that's code too. And I think one of the things is, and that's why I'm really lucky now. I have found my voice, and I am unafraid and unapologetic in the boardroom or anywhere, frankly, for saying what I think. And I understand that comes with a great deal of privilege. So, but I think we need to unpack the whys, this cultural fit, like why, and what are we talking about?
Yeah. And what does that really mean? Exactly. I mean, cultural fit's about your values.
Right. And I also think that we need to be mindful too about, diversity and what are we talking about? What does that mean? Can we name what that means? Because if we all went to Ivy League colleges and all go to Ivy League colleges, all send our children to private schools, all vacation in the same place, all do and the look of the boardroom looks diverse. Is that diverse too?
Right.
I don't know. And so I think we have to be critical. Again, I just also say it's easier said than done. I totally get it.
Absolutely. And, in that discussion, our knowledge lands on that definition of diversity. As you said, like we have to challenge ourselves to recognize that diversity also includes people of ability or lack thereof. And we talked about generation before, and the value of having that younger voice around the table today, and the what I would say is the tremendous opportunity of 4 or 5 generations. You have those who have institutional knowledge. I can't tell you how many times when I was younger, now I'm more mature, okay? But when I was younger and I'd look at older folks in organization, how many times I didn't say, oh geez, like, what do they know? Because I'm like the Spitfire coming in. Oh my God, the institutional knowledge of the generation that comes before us. I have never in my life valued and appreciated the great generation more than I do now. And that goes right down to living with my mother, who's 87, right? When we sit and have discussions at the dinner table at night, and I'm like, this woman is brilliant, right? The life she led, like, what can we learn from that? At the same time, I got my 29-year-old twins on the other end, where I'm saying, what am I learning from them? And this whole idea of mentor-mentee, right? Two-way relationship. It's the same in generation. It's the same with people of differences. Like, wow, if we could just be open to recognizing what people bring to the table, then we'd understand who we need at the table. Fair?
Absolutely, Michele. And when we talk about diversity, I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge and celebrate that today is International Transgender Day of Visibility.
Thank you for noting that.
And celebrating the contributions of the transgender community, and a shout out. I see you, I support you, I stand with you. But there's just so much that we're so many assumptions that unless we name what we mean by diversity, contributions could be lost.
I think that it's just such, as we're coming down to our last few minutes, we have about 5 minutes left just so we can frame the things we want to cover. But, that whole idea, talk about action items. We're very action oriented at BIA. So I want to challenge our participants today from this session and the other sessions, create no more than 3 to 5 action items coming out of today. I already have 3, so I'm going to have to reprioritize at the end of the day, right? But this concept of defining diversity versus assuming we all know what it means relative to our own organization, and how it carries us forward and how it drives back to our values. This is like such an aha moment right now for me, because I just go to the immediate perception of what we think it is. Step back and really challenge yourselves in your C-suite, your boardroom, and in your workforce. 3 levels of this. What do we mean by that? Tanuja, we have about 5 minutes left, and I'm just looking. I don't have any express direct questions, so toss one along if you want, right? We talked about your workforce. We talked about your board. We talked about your C-suite, your donors, okay? How do you could have a mission. You're only successful when people bring money to you so that you could put that money out on the street. What are you doing to bring your community of donors together in order to create the types of funds to fund the programs that you want to see Dodge support for the future?
So I have to say that I am so grateful because the Dodge Foundation has an endowment, and that we don't actively have to seek fundraising, and which, again, a great deal of privilege and comfort to be able to not have to do that. What I will say, though, is that that endowment is also how we can make impact. And so that's what I say when we're bringing all of our resources to bear. So things that we're exploring with things that we have already done with our endowment is divested from fossil fuels and plastics and firearms and private prisons. But we are taking a more concerted effort on women and minority-owned. I'm sorry about that. Women and Black and Brown and BIPOC owned hedge funds and investment firms. And what we're also exploring is private equity and venture capital. We invest in the Newark Venture Partners. And we've also have created a program on how we can think about investing in the state of New Jersey using that endowment. But Michele, to your point, though, not all organizations have that comfort, and I acknowledge that. So I know that it's challenging for many not-for-profits to kind of go out on the limb to be as bold when they're talking about structural racism and some of the initiatives that have trigger words for organizations and potential donors, and I get that. But I think that if an organization, again, Michele is authentic and honest and humble in their learning journey and transparent on where they're going, I think that there are funders out there who would care about that. It's not a great answer to your question, but I do want to acknowledge that when you're a not-for-profit and you are beholden to your donors, they are one of your stakeholders, and if they're not believing it, if they don't believe in this, then what do you do if they're your fundamental donor? And I think that's kind of an existential question that many not-for-profits are having.
And as you said, Tanuja, as we sit here today, we don't have all the answers, right? And that's why this is a journey, and this is why Stronger Together means so much. And this whole concept of being a journey, how do we sustain the energy and momentum that we have today? Look, 2020 is an awakening for our world. How do we sustain the positive energy of change that is standing right in front of us right now?
Such a great question, Michele. That is why in 2021, we are, because I need it, prioritizing self-care. And prioritizing taking the time, especially we're in the Zoom environment. I know at Dodge, we're going to be in the Zoom environment for another several months at least. And so how do we build culture and camaraderie and that an envelope of care amongst each other? But some of the things that we're trying to do is also give people some time. And, if that means kind of more days off, if that's needed to kind of restore, also just some more support systems for mental health and mental well-being. I just think that one of the things I'm just trying to keep top of mind is that we as a society, every single one of us have learned a lot about ourselves individually. We've learned a lot about our community. We've learned a lot about how we work. And there's things that we want to keep. What are those things? So at Dodge, we just had a reflective session last week. We said, what is it that we want to keep? And pretty much the whole group, and I'm not going out of the limb, was saying that we kind of like this working from home. So how do we kind of sustain that? There was also, we kind of like these kind of random Friday afternoon get-togethers where we're not talking about anything other than silly stuff. And so I was really happy to hear that. What are those things we want to keep? And what are those things that we miss that we want to really promote? I said this a lot through my talk today, naming things and saying it out loud. I think that's really important in anything that you do. Sometimes I just think that saying it and saying it in community with each other brings it to life. And so whether it's defining diversity, saying what you want to keep, saying what your North Star is, because sometimes you'll realize that your North Star is different from somebody else's North Star, but there's actually a lot more similarities than differences.
Yeah, yeah. And, finishing on a point of personal inspiration, if I may, and North Stars, because you talked about self-help and you talked about vocalizing. And, the crisis of today, and this came up in a question, so I'm just going to frame it, but the crisis of today is what's going on in our Asian community. We have Floyd's trial going on right now. My mother is fixed to the TV watching this. Okay, it's a topic of dinner every night. We've got the crisis in the Asian community. We have so many populations who are individually hurting right now. Tanuja, if you could share just a moment again of inner strength and personal reflection for people who are really feeling so challenged right now, and how do I come out? How do I vocalize, and how do I self-help myself through one of these crises? What would you offer in closing to everyone today?
All of these things that you named, and I'm going to end on something positive, is born out of violence and hate. But what I try to frame is that, I come from a position of a place where I can use my voice and influence, and we all have that.
Yes. So
reframing the visibility of something that's been invisible, the AAPI community. That's one of the things we're thinking about at the Dodge Foundation as we think about centering our work on racial equity, being more intentional about how we can support the AAPI community and all of our communities. But a little piece of advice I would share for you is if your phone and scrolling is not serving you, put it down and go take a walk.
Oh, here.
So, and get some fresh air. I'm here in central New Jersey. It's a little cloudy today, but the flowers are coming out. So let's just go and enjoy the fact that spring is here.
To allow ourselves to be sprung. Tanuja, it's been an awesome discussion. I mean, so much transparency, so much good information, resource, thought. I want to thank you. And again, stronger together. Folks, we have voices, and every one of us represents something, right? Let's bring our authentic something to the front. Let's join our hands together. Let's be stronger together. Tanuja, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you all. It's great to see all of your faces, and thank you for having me. Thank you, Michele.
Thank you so much.